Hello, I'm Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream. Today we are going to be talking about 1 and 2-point linear perspective. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof: critiques, tutorials, and professional development. We actually do have the stream I did a ways back that focuses only on 1-point perspective. And we also have this other stream that talks about space. So I do recommend you guys take a look at those because I realized in putting this together, you kind of can't explain 2-point perspective without explaining 1 point again. So we're going to do some review to make sure everybody has a really thorough understanding of how perspective works. I lost strong feelings about linear perspective, and one of them is that I don't know why, but so many people tell me that typically when they've been taught linear perspective, it's just terribly dry and boring. Tell me in the chat, those of you guys who did study linear perspective in an art class or in college or whatever context you studied it in, did you find it dry and boring? Because I did, and I just don't think it has to be that way. So you guys will find that my method of teaching linear perspective, it's really not the way it's traditionally taught. But for me, I feel it makes the concepts more concrete and not just blocks. Because let's face it, blocks are boring, guys. I just can't draw blocks all day long. So I don't want it to be boring because come on, you guys. It doesn't have to be boring. It's only boring if you let it be boring. So we're going to make sure this is fun because it should be. It should be something people can get excited about. It should not be something that is like watching paint peel. See, it's not boring. Like once you guys start recognizing linear perspective, you start realizing, oh, it is really fun. Actually, it's not boring or dry at all. Angie says, it's really boring, and the instructors usually get depth and width wrong, which is what really makes people confused. There are certain things that can trip people up, and it's very strange because people don't oftentimes teach the big picture, which I think is the issue. And so when you keep it too abstract, and it's just blocks, and there's no Wolverine, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're going to try to make this really fun. This is a basic concept that I think is important to understand, which is that linear perspective, it's right or wrong. And you guys will hear me say all the time that art is subjective and there's no correct way to do it. This is the one time in visual art where there literally is a right or wrong. And that's why linear perspective is tricky, because if it's right, you're fine and nobody notices. But when it's wrong, it's like wrong, and people can really notice. And of course, you'll see there are lots of artists who will mess with the perspective on purpose because they're trying to make something really wonky and strange. That's different. I'm talking about when it's clear that somebody's trying to make it correct, but there's like one little thing that's off, it can throw off the whole thing. So that's what I think is really challenging about linear perspective. And it's weird because it appeals to two different groups of people in two different ways. For example, and tell me which one you are. There are people like me who are freaked out by measurements, by rulers and compass. Like I look at that stuff and I just want to cry. Tell me if you're in that group. Then there's also another group of people who loves that. Like they find it so satisfying and, oh, you can measure and it's perfect and I know it's correct. Like there's definitely a group of people who really absorb it in a positive way. I did not. My whole approach was like, oh my God, I can't measure. I can't do this. And so I think it's very much a black and white situation for a lot of people when it comes to linear perspective. And by the way, I put the link in the video description below. You guys should click on this link. The slides I'm showing you guys right now, these are by J.M.W. Turner, and they are his slides from his perspective lectures that he gave when he taught at the Royal Academy. And I was watching this, I was like, wow, my slides kind of suck. Like compared to Turner's, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's doing this like beautiful watercolor paint. I'm like, dude, Google Slides all the way, color code lines. Like, that's all I can handle. But anyway, I just thought you guys might like to see in the olden days how they used to talk about linear perspective. So this is interesting. Slepneer says, I wanted to be more intuitive rather than so technical. I think you're going to like this, Slepneer, because that's more my approach to it. I don't tend to be so uptight about the specifics, but I do care about getting the ultimate goal to be realized, which is to show depth. When it comes down to it, that's really what linear perspective is all about. And Max says, I read through Scott Robertson's book and I learned a lot, but boy, it was dense. Yeah, see, like that book, I'm sure it's great for some people, but I look at the diagrams in that book and my head explodes. So I just need like really, really basic situation. Okay. Another thing to just keep in mind is that linear perspective, it's very much a geometric system. And so in theory, if you guys figure it all out, you don't have to observe anything in real life. You can just make some dots, do some lines, boom, you can have a cityscape very, very quickly. But the thing is, it's not really that simple. And I'm actually not into that because I feel that it doesn't translate very well to the ultimate artistic process. I'll show you guys why. But really, those of you guys who are a little freaked out by linear perspective, and tell me if you are. If you're in the chat, tell me if you don't get it, or if you sort of get it, but you're missing some things, or if you're just really afraid. Tell me what, because that was my first actual reaction was, oh my God, this freaks me out. I don't know what to do with this. It was really intimidating. And so I get it. If you guys are intimidated, that totally makes sense to me. But really what it comes down to it's like what I tell you guys about anatomy. It's connect the dots. You just got to find the dots, you connect them, and you'll be fine. Ultimately, that's what it all comes down to. This is what I really want you guys to remember, okay? Yes, we're going to talk about vanishing points, and we're going to talk about all that technical stuff, but ultimately, you have to remember that linear perspective, it's not just this technical thing you do. It actually can very much help tell a story in your artwork. And that's ultimately what it is. Linear perspective is just another visual tool that you guys can use as artists to say what it is you're trying to say. It's the same thing as lighting, as color, as anatomy. It's not any different. It's just people treat it differently because it looks so different than everything else. Crosby says, I really struggle with perspective, which sucks because I really want to draw architecture. Okay, well, you're definitely going to have to conquer that at some point. And Octavio says, I've only done one piece intentionally incorporating perspective in my life, and it was a high school assignment. Slepneer says, I sort of get it, but it winds up being boring when you slog through it. Yeah, see, I don't like having to do that. Actually, guys, I have a little confession. So terrible. Do you guys know how I learned linear perspective? It wasn't because I took a class or I actually agreed to teach a class at RISD on linear perspective to sophomores in the illustration department. I didn't know linear perspective because you know what? The semester that they teach linear perspective at RISD to undergrads, I was in the painting department because I was a painting major for the first semester. And when I switched into illustration, I missed that class and my drawing credits from the painting department transferred and they were like, oh, you don't need to take the class. So I never took linear perspective. And so then many years later, they were like, oh, we have this class available. Can you teach this? I'm like, yep. I was like, okay, classes in the fall. I'm going to do it over the summer. I've got several months to work it out. And yeah, you guys, the best way to learn how to do something is to teach a class. That's exactly how it works. Joe says, this is one of the topics which when read or taught, I understand, but when I try doing it, I'm screwed. I get lost all the time. Please help. Yeah, that's the thing is a lot of people, they get the concept, but they don't really get how to apply it to their artwork. And that's a problem. I think that if you can't make that leap, it's somewhat of an issue. Okay, so we're going to take a look at, this is a huge fresco painting. It's called The School of Athens, and it's in the Vatican City by Raphael. And this is like mega show-off linear perspective painting. But I want to show you guys why this tells a story, okay? You guys see these two dudes in the middle, okay? This is actually Plato and Aristotle. And there are all these other people, but honestly, nobody cares about them. This painting is definitely just about Plato and Aristotle. So there they are. They're hanging out. Now, do you guys notice how it's not an accident that they are right in the middle and they're situated where the vanishing point is? And so really what Raphael is doing here, he's using the linear perspective to direct your eye towards Plato and Aristotle, so that way he can push that narrative, because the other people in the image don't really matter. And so what is he going to put Plato and Aristotle on the ceiling? Probably not. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But in this case, the linear perspective really points you to the two most important figures. All right. Who here has seen The Shining? It's been a while, but you guys, there is so much linear perspective in The Shining, especially one point. I haven't seen it for a while. Tell me if you've seen it, or if you're one of the young people who has seen all the parodies, but you've never actually seen the real thing, which I actually think is really common nowadays with a lot of things. Okay, so we have the little kid, he's running around on his little tricycle, and, two little creepy twins staring at him at the end of the hallway. And if you guys look at the vanishing lines, which are the yellow lines pointing to the twins, we're seeing this view as if we're the little boy, and the perspective is pushing us to look at the twins. Okay, so that's why this is not just a, hey, it looks cool. It's like filmmakers and artists, they use linear perspective to help tell a story. Let's see what else people are saying in the chat. And let's see. Lisa says, application is often harder than the rules. Absolutely. It's the same thing with anatomy. Like, I know a lot of people, they know the muscles, but they don't really know how to apply it to their figure drawing. Who can guess? What scene is this from? I'm just testing you guys, because the linear perspective here, it's very dramatic, and it does play a part in telling the story. So let me know if you guys can figure out what this is. Akshita says, my brain can't process how to make linear end up becoming 2-point. Okay, well, I'm going to show you guys how to do that, because it's easier than you think it is, but it's not so simple to figure out on your own. Oh man, have you guys not figured this out yet? Oh, I'm so disappointed. This is that scene in Sherlock, of course it is, when he's with Moriarty and Dr. Watson has bombs all over him. Oh, he looks so good in this. I haven't seen Sherlock in such a long time. But look at this, okay? You got the linear perspective of the pool. You can see that in the tiles of the pool and also the lines in the pool itself. And look at this, you guys. It's not an accident that the linear perspective is pushing you to look at Sherlock and Watson. I mean, I do that anyway. It's like, doesn't matter where they are. But the linear perspective, it definitely helps you. So when you guys are getting all caught up about all the technicalities and how do I learn this, just remember that it's just another tool. It's not its own thing. It's really part and parcel of everything else that we've been talking about. So here's the thing. Typically, this is usually how people teach linear perspective. Usually there's some huge diagram and there's a million lines and there's dots and there's all these words and explanations, and there's a super dry lecture where you talk about this. And okay, that's fine. You know, if people want to teach that way, fine. It doesn't work for me. It's too dry and abstract. And usually what happens, teachers will assign a project like this. So they'll say, okay, I want you to make these blocks, put them in 2-point or 1-point perspective. Sometimes they're told make a cityscape, put some windows on it. Oh my God, you guys, looking at a project like this, it just makes me tired. And I just know as a teacher, if I'm tired, there's no chance the students are going to be into it. Like, I have to be into it for this to really work. Because here's the thing, you guys, you can draw all those lines, you can connect all those dots, you do all those things. But the thing is, if you guys don't understand how that works in the context of real life, okay, none of those dots and lines mean anything. And that's the issue, is that people will understand the diagram, they know how to connect the dots, but then if I say to them, hey, where do you see 1-point perspective in this Sherlock show? A lot of them won't be able to do it. And so at that point, it's just sort of meaningless, because basically those charts, that's one universe, but the real world is another universe. You have to find a way to connect those things together. Bestowing the brush is asking, would it be acceptable to just go out and do some urban sketching and draw angles based on real life? Oh, you are 10 steps ahead of me. I'm going to get to that, but yeah, absolutely. That's basically what I'm going to push you guys to know how to do. I mean, to me, you guys, all those lines, and you might as well just be looking at a Kandinsky painting, because it's like, it doesn't matter if you don't really truly understand what that is like. Yeah, like Jasmine saying, exactly. That's what drives me crazy with the charts. It's too abstract. Nobody understands it. Here's the other thing, is I see so many classes where it's like, you have to draw all these blocks, you have to draw all these rectangles, and you have to draw these cylinders. And I'm like, okay, I'm sure that works for some people. That's fine. If it works for you, great. But the blocks are extremely limited in terms of what you guys can learn, because it's sort of like those memes, you know, where they're like, okay, step 1, boom, step 2. And I'm like, no, it does not work that way. Okay, you guys don't go from cubes and blocks to St. Peter receiving the keys. Like, it just doesn't work that way. Okay. How are you guys going to get from step 1 to step 2? Like, it's just too big of a leap for people. And then what ends up happening is you're stuck in cube land, and you're not going to get to those Renaissance paintings if that's what it is you guys want to do. Like this. How do you go from that to this photo? This is just a photo of a library that I took. This isn't anything that exciting. And yet I think a lot of people would not know how to get from one place to the next. Okay. And you know something, you guys? Before the stream started, I actually Googled linear perspective drawing, and this is what pops up. This is the stereotypical way that linear perspective is usually taught. You guys see this? It's always like a block building with perfect rectangular windows. I'm like, in what world do people live in buildings like that? I mean, even the most boring generic building you will see today has so much more character than that. And so what you end up doing is these like really boring generic still lives of these really fake looking cities. And I don't know, like, I just would be bored to tears. So if you guys have been taught linear perspective like this and it worked for you, great. It did not work for me. It's really, really hard. Like Basil says, I don't want to be stuck in Minecraft. Oh my God. Yeah, my kids see everything in terms of Minecraft. You know, maybe that's not a bad thing, so they can think about the buildings. Okay, so here's the thing. So let's say you're in high school, you get that cube assignment, and okay, you did the cubes, it's correct and everything. But it's like, how do you get from that to that? Like, this is George Tooker, okay? He's such a wonderful painter. His stuff is creepy, it's eerie, it talks about public spaces, and he uses linear perspective in strange ways. Like, sometimes in his work, the linear perspective is very correct, and other times he messes with it a little bit. But in all of his work, the underlying theme really is this feeling of anxiety, feeling very uncomfortable in a crowd. Like, this is such a scary looking bank teller line. I'm like, dude, I'm so glad my bank does not look like this. But it's like, if you look at this image, the linear perspective is there, but this is not just linear perspective. This painting has all kinds of other things. It has lighting, it has color, it has composition, it has figures. This is what I want you guys to learn how to do, because the perspective doesn't help you if it doesn't assist you in creating these images. I would give a shout out to Jill. Thank you so much for the super sticker. We greatly appreciate your support. Any contribution you guys can make, it helps us keep Art Prof 100% free. And when you guys support us, you're supporting people across the world who can't afford to take an art class. So we greatly appreciate any support you guys can give us. So this is Antonio Lopez Garcia. And I think when you guys look at this drawing, you don't think linear perspective right away. You think, oh my God, that's a creepy bathroom. I do not want to be here. That's my first thought. The perspective is definitely there, and it's hugely important in terms of the composition, but it's not everything. So that's what I really want you guys to understand. So this is the basis of how I teach linear perspective. My feeling is that if you want to be able to draw linear perspective, you have to be able to identify where you see it in real life. It's like all the other stuff we talked to you guys about. How do you see shadows? How do you see highlights? We just did that art dare. Where do you see value? Where do you see form? Exact same thing with linear perspective, trying to recognize where you actually encounter it in real life. I'm going to give a shout out to Jasmine. Thank you so much for the super sticker. We greatly appreciate your support. That's so wonderful to have that. Okay, so this is what you guys should do. Wherever you're going, okay, I know people are not traveling much nowadays, but you can do this in your house. You don't even have to go outside. Look for linear perspective everywhere you go, okay? Just walk around your house and say, where do I see linear perspective? And stop yourself and say, okay, is this 1 point? Is this 2 point? Is this 3 point? I know we haven't gotten to those yet, but this is the type of seeing you guys need to train yourselves to do if you really, truly want to understand this, okay? Because all those diagrams are not helpful if you guys can't see it in real life. It's really, really important. Neil says, when I use 1 point, I tend to smack my subject and vanishing point dead center in the page. Any tips? I think probably you are starting with lines and dots and connecting things. I think if you just like make the image as you want and don't think about the perspective and let the perspective evolve a little bit more incrementally, and then you can shift it up and down or side to side, that's probably better. Because I think what happens is people create those diagrams, and those diagrams, they start to feel very rigid, and it makes people not want to change things. And you guys know when you're making a composition, you want to be able to change things because things are not always the way you want them to be the first time through. Yeah, like this is awesome, you guys. Akshita says, me looking at the TV right now is linear. Exactly. That's just awesome. So good job, you guys. Keep that going. When you're watching movies, you can say, is there linear perspective in the scene? You know, not every scene has linear perspective, but this is how you guys can do your art homework, okay? Like you have to walk around your house. You just turn on the TV, play a movie, and you just say, is there linear perspective? I think so. There's some straight lines. There's got to be some linear perspective in here. So look for it, you guys. That's what you're trying to see. And Crosby says, it's true that whenever I think of linear perspective, I always think of the cliche street with buildings, not small rooms. That creepy bathroom is so cool. You guys will see it in little places that you don't expect to see it. And so that's the thing, is you have to learn to see it beyond that cliche, because that cliche is not everything. It's there, but it's not going to save you in most circumstances. Okay. You can see it anywhere, you guys, okay? So you could just be walking down a street and you're like, okay, this is a boring street, but guess what? There's linear perspective in the sidewalk, okay? So there are certain things you can look for. Like usually if there's a brick wall, there's gonna be linear perspective. Usually if there are sidings on a house, there will be linear perspective. So there are certain architectural features that you guys can look for. And that's like a little clue that says, hey, if there's brick on this building, there's probably linear perspective around here somewhere. You can start to put together some of those clues. Or if you're watching an X-Men movie, there's usually linear perspective, right? So you'll find it there. I don't know why I have this picture of the bank in Rhode Island, but anyway, this is Rhode Island. And you can see there's definitely linear perspective in there. There's linear perspective in Sherlock. So, you guys can watch Sherlock. You say, oh, it's an educational experience because look at this. I'm understanding how to contextualize linear perspective concepts into real life. You see, you kill two birds with one stone. It's pretty awesome. Lisa says, I don't understand. Doesn't linear perspective exist literally everywhere all the time? Technically, you probably could argue that, but I think that there are certain circumstances where the perspective is really obvious because, I'll get to this later, but things have to be lined up. Like if you're on a street and the lines are not parallel, you're not going to see specific linear perspective. I mean, there's atmospheric perspective, which is perspective, and it doesn't matter if it's cloudy or whatever. So technically there's perspective everywhere, but linear perspective is not always that obvious. You can see it at libraries. That's actually, if you guys want the easiest linear perspective situation, go to a library. I know people can't go to a library right now, but honestly, hallways full of bookshelves, that is like the quintessential haven for linear perspective. And so you can start at a place like that. Start in a space that's very clear cut and very obvious, because in a library, everything's lined up and it's going to be really easy to see. If you live in a house and things are a little bit wonky, it might not be so easy to see. So if you guys have trouble with it, maybe start with a space like a library or even like the grocery store is good because things line up. Blue Wolf says, some of those have the vanishing point off the page. How does this play into composition? Should we avoid putting the vanishing point in the middle? Nope, there's actually a trick for how to do that. So I'm going to go over how to do that. Akshita says, linear perspective where the horizon and vanishing point aren't right in the middle throws me off and I get confused. You're not the only one. It can be very confusing where things are. And honestly, you guys, you really do have to measure it. I mean, I have so many students who I would give them an assignment and I look at their drawing, I'm like, you guys didn't measure, did you? They're like, nope. Like, you guys have to measure, okay? I'm not saying you have to measure with a ruler, but there's a trick that I do with string and a push pin that works just as well. And I think it's faster, actually, than using a ruler. Yeah, like totally. This is the mindset, okay? Ermac says, I don't watch TV for the plot. I watch it for the linear perspective. Awesome. Yeah, or like Mahika says, I went to my school hallways recently. I definitely started looking at perspective in this way. Yeah, or like Vishaka says, yep, been to a bookstore stacked with bookshelves. Yep, anywhere you guys can see it, that's what you want to start with, okay? So this is my recommendation, okay? Before you guys even pick up a pencil to try to draw or compose or do anything with linear perspective, just take photos where you see 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point perspective. Don't even start drawing. That's the issue, is that a lot of people, they'll watch a lecture, they'll start measuring and making dots and doing all that stuff and everything. And I'm like, no. Just take your phone, walk around, and just take photos where you see linear perspective and save those pictures, shoot them, and then go back and look at them and say, okay, well, why is this 1 point? Why is this 2 point? What am I noticing? This is how I taught it at RISD. Like when I taught the class that I had to learn linear perspective for, I had the students do this. I said, you guys aren't going to draw. You're just going to take photos across the space for half an hour, and then we're going to regroup, and then we're going to draw. Okay, so if you guys have never done this before, do it, because it is so helpful because you have a visual record with the photo. Drawing it takes too long. When you shoot with the photo and you put your camera in different ways, it can be really, really fun to understand that. So just do this. These are pictures I took. Actually, this is when I was in Providence. This is on like College Hill, and this is the Wellesley Library. And you guys can see perspective. It's not just hallways. Sometimes it's a whole building that you're looking at, or other times it's a table. And so you're trying to get a range. Like you're not trying to always take a picture of a hallway. You're trying to say, well, can I see the perspective in this table? Can I see it in this chair? And the more places that you guys start to notice it, you're really going to be sharpening your eye. It's going to really train you to see. I'm telling you guys, half of being an artist is seeing. How do you see things? Like you've got to look for this stuff. Then you'll be able to draw it. You guys can't draw things if you can't identify them. That's the most important thing. Bestowing the brush says it's slightly different between photo taken and perspective done off that versus in real life though, right? Well, yeah, I mean, if you hold your camera at like a wonky angle, that's not going to work because you'll get something that's totally unrealistic. I mean, it's okay to do that, but if you want to keep it more simple, just hold your camera where your eye is so you're not doing some like really wacko camera angle. That'll make it more simple. I mean, you can do a wacko camera angle. That's fine. It's just it might make things a little bit more confusing for you because it's not you in the space. It's your camera in the space and not your eyes. And your eyes, because of the eye level, is very important in where you are in the space. So I would recommend, I'm so glad you asked that question. When you guys have your phone, hold your phone like this and just look that way. Like don't stand here and then hold your phone like this because you're going to get a really weird angle that way. And John Murph is asking, besides landscapes and places as linear perspective, is there linear perspective on the faces of people? No, linear perspective is really for architecture. It's really for things that are geometric. Atmospheric perspective is more for things like clouds and landscape and stuff like that. There's probably somebody out there that has done that, but not me. Okay, so let me show you guys the difference between 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point, okay? I'm not going to go over 3 point today. It's just too much. It'd be like a 10-hour stream, okay? So 1 point is basically the most limited view. The cube tends to not look very dynamic. It's boring, okay? Now, when you get to 2 point, things get a lot more dynamic. Does everybody see how the diagonals are way more exaggerated? And then 3 point is like even more exaggerated, okay? So this is the breakdown in terms of a cube. But to really understand this, you have to understand what it's like to actually be in the space. And that's why I advocate you guys to walk around and see it, because linear perspective, people think it's all about the dots and lines, but it's actually about where is the person in the space. And if you don't understand that, the rest of it's not really going to matter at all. Okay, so here we have 1 point perspective. This is the basic breakdown. I'm going to give you guys more specifics in a little bit. And really, it's very straightforward. 1 point perspective has one vanishing point, okay? So take a wild guess. How many vanishing points are in 2 point? There are 2. Vanishing point 1, vanishing point 2. Okay, so there we go. 3 point perspective, 3 vanishing points, yes, okay? 3 point perspective is so hard because the vanishing points are like multiple feet off the page. It's what Blue Wolf had asked earlier, that sometimes the vanishing points are not in the image. And you guys can see this here. This is an MC Escher drawing, but you can see the vanishing points are not even in the image. They're like way, way off, because then you end up with all these vanishing lines, okay? So it's like things get more and more wacky and dramatic the more vanishing points that you add. But honestly, if you guys understand 2 point, 3 point is not that much harder. I think the harder thing is understanding the difference between 1 and 2 points. That's the one that people tend to struggle with a lot more. Okay. Blue Wolf says, please talk about the building versus the tabletop. It's the same, but it's different. It is and it isn't, to be perfectly confusing. I will show you guys how that works, though. Okay, so this is, again, the thing nobody talks about. People are so into their dots and lines, okay? You have to think about linear perspective, that it's showing a specific point of view of a person who is in the space. not the viewer of the artwork, okay? If you're a person and you're looking at a painting, your point of view does not matter. You're thinking about the point of view of the person who's in the space. So let me show you guys what this means. All right, so we have The Shining. Let's say we're stuck at the hotel with crazy Jack Nicholson and creepy twins. So we have a hallway here. This is 1-point perspective. So let's pretend I'm the white icon person in the middle, okay? So to see this room in terms of 1-point perspective, I have to stand there, okay? If I stand anywhere else, it might not be 1-point perspective. So that's the thing that people don't understand, is that this is a particular point of view, okay? We've talked a lot about point of view in terms of illustration, in terms of comics, hugely important in terms of understanding linear perspective. Okay, does everybody see what happened now? Person moved. The person was here. They were looking straight down the hallway. Now the person is standing at the corner and they're looking right at the corner. That's a very different place. Like if you're standing here, you're not going to see the same space like this person. They're going to have a completely different point of view. Okay, so we have person A standing here, person B standing here. Okay, they're now going to see this in terms of 2-point perspective. 3-point is basically if person B, I don't know why, turned into a bird and flew up and looked down, that would be 3-point perspective, okay? So again, that's a storytelling part of linear perspective. If you turn into a bird and all of a sudden you get 3-point perspective, that's a story, okay? That's the difference, okay? So we went from being a person at 2-point, we turned into a bird, and now we're looking down, we're getting 3-point perspective, okay? Or maybe you turn into a bunny, okay? Now you're really, really small, you're on the floor, and you're looking up that corner. That is also 3-point perspective. So 3-point perspective, it's just like hyper dramatic. It's like you're an eagle circling the space, or you're like an ant on the floor. It's either like really, really, really high up or really, really low. That's the difference, okay? So, yep, basically, Fab Geek is saying 3-point perspective is a bird's eye view. It's not only that, it's bird's eye view if the bird was in front of a corner, okay? Because you can have bird's eye view and you're just looking down, and you know that doesn't have 2-point perspective. It has to involve a corner. Does everybody see how the bunny is right in front of the corner and it's going up? That's what makes it 3-point. See, exactly. These are great stories. Bestowing says you were so frightened out of your socks that you leapt through the ceiling. And Vishaka says smaller than a bunny may be a bug or an ant. Yeah, so think about what you transform into for that to happen. Charisma says, would this be the most helpful when trying to construct the background and environment in the picture? It's important anytime you want to make an interior space that's architectural, if you guys want to show a city, but it just really changes things in terms of point of view, because the point of view, honestly, is the best part of linear perspective. People think it's all about the architecture, but it's more about like showing what it's like to be a bunny, like looking up. What does that look like? Okay. Think about movies like camera angle. Okay. If a movie maker puts the camera looking up at the ceiling, that's a really different effect than somebody who's just standing there looking down the hallway. It's really, really different. Akshita says a 3-year-old baby looking at a room will be 3-point. What? Oh my God, I'm so confused. Okay. All right. So this is real life, okay? This is my house. You see that cage at the end of the hallway? This is my guinea pig. So, this is me, okay? I'm looking at my guinea pigs, and I'm looking at 1-point perspective. Thanks, you guys. Now, if I was standing here, and I decided, okay, I'm going to turn to the right, this is what I would see. I would see this, okay? It's not a big difference. I just turn my body a little bit to the right. Now, you don't see the green wall on the left anymore because now I'm like turned towards the corner, okay? Now I'm standing in front of the corner. I'm not where I was before, okay? If I turn to my right again, just a little bit more, look at what happens. Now I'm here, okay? This is the same space. The only difference is that I turn myself a little bit to the right, and now I'm standing right in front of a corner, okay? Before, a couple slides back, I was looking at my guinea pigs, okay? This is 1 point. Now, when I come here, this is 2 point. I'm not looking at the guinea pigs anymore. I'm looking at the corner. That's what's going on, okay? So this is where I am in the space. That is 2 point. Basically, if you guys want to find 2 point, just find a corner, okay? Stand in front of the corner and you're going to have 2 point. That's the easiest way that I can describe it. Akshika says, so if we are always looking at corners, it's 1 point. Depending on where you are. I mean, I'd have to look at it, but yeah, that's a pretty good rule of thumb. If you are standing and looking at a building and you're standing at a corner, that's probably what you're going to see. See what happened? I turned into a bunny, and now look at how different that corner looks. Okay, in the previous slide, everything was very straight, and I look like a regular sized person, right? But now that I'm on the floor and I'm a little bunny or ant, do you guys see how my perception of that corner changed? Now you feel like a bunny, like you look up and you feel tiny in that space. That's what you're looking for. Or maybe you turn into a bird and you're still standing in front of the corner, but you're looking down, okay? So to get this view, when I took this photo, I had to like pivot my camera so that it could simulate what it would look like if I was a bird looking down on that corner, okay? That's it. It's just changing your point of view. That's pretty much all it is, you guys. All right, so Lisa's asking about curvy objects in space. There's a whole method for cylinders and ellipses. Honestly, I don't know it. I have a book that does explain it very well, but I've never had the patience, shall we say, to actually go in and learn that. For me, this is good enough. If you guys want to know the book, I'll recommend. It's called Drawing, Structure, and Vision. It's actually by two of my former colleagues at RISD. So I can put that in the video description later on. But I mean, honestly, for me, this is enough. I don't really need anything more than that. Okay, so ready? Here's the breakdown. We're going to review. 1 point, you're looking at guinea pigs, okay? 2 point, I've turned to the right and I'm now looking straight at that corner. Now 3 point, I turned into a bunny, okay? So I'm still standing in front of the corner, but I'm looking up. And so now this corner looks huge. It looks like it's like looming over me because remember, I've turned into a bunny. Or the other version is that I turn into a bird and I'm also standing on the corner, but I'm looking down. That's the breakdown, you guys. You have to see it in real life. You see, none of those charts help you until you actually see what this looks like in real life. Okay, let's briefly review 1 point perspective, and then I'll break down 2 point perspective as well. Okay, again, The Shining. It's perfect. They have so much linear perspective in The Shining. Okay, so 1 point is a horizon line. And the thing to know about the horizon line is that it's always a perfect horizontal. It never does anything else. It's really, really reliable. Basically, the way you guys can think about it, actually, I went on this horrible whale watch when I was in 7th grade. And I was totally going to puke my brains out. Oh my God, it was horrible. Tell me if you guys get seasick. It was the worst. I thought I was going to die. But anyway, I had a teacher who said to me, well, some people, when they feel seasick, they'll look at the horizon line, which is where the sky and the ocean meet, because it's a stabilizing force, because it just stays horizontal. It doesn't change or move. So you could be on a boat that's like rocking up and down, but the horizon line will always stay the same. Okay. So the horizon line, it's also your eye level. Okay. So, and I'm talking about the person in The Shining. I'm not talking about me looking at a painting. Okay, I'm in The Shining. Maybe I'm going to kill Jack Nicholson, but that is my eye level. Okay. You could also think about the horizon line. There's a sky and it's a lake, fine, ocean, whatever. Sky and ocean, when they meet, that's the horizon line. Just think about it that way. I mean, I'm not really thinking about that right now, but you got to keep this fun. Okay, so now we have the person who's in the space, okay, and they're looking right at Jack Nicholson, and that's the horizon line. We did not see any whales, Crosby. That is the really sad thing. I was puking my brains out, and we didn't see any whales. That was like the worst field trip I've ever been on in my life. Okay, now this is very important. This distinction between above eye level and below eye level, okay? So anything that's above the horizon line is above my eye, okay? Anything that's below the horizon line is something that I have to like look down on in order to see, because that eye level determines everything. Like if you become a bunny and you're really tiny, your eye level is going to sink way down. It's going to be very low. If you become a bird and you fly up into the sky, your eye level is really, really high. And so that's why that point of view thing is really important. Okay, now vanishing points, the most important thing for you guys to know, they're always on the horizon line. They don't wander. They don't go into a vanishing line. They're always on the horizon line. And so if you remember that, it makes things a lot easier later on, because it's like it just cuts back on the number of things. So vanishing lines, they basically converge at the vanishing point. So this is where it's like connect the dots. It's like, okay, you have one dot, which is the vanishing point, and then you have the lines that come out from there, and they basically converge. Okay, that's what you're looking at. Okay, so your vanishing lines, you guys can see the vanishing lines follow the top of the ceiling, they follow the floor. But again, it's like if you had a zigzag hallway, this would not work, okay? Or if you had a curly hallway, this would not work either. It only works if it's a hallway where the lines are parallel to each other. Okay, so to find two-point perspective, you find a corner, you stand in front of it. Okay, so here we have the person. This is a very short person though. Does everybody see that? You have to be very short to show this because of the eye level. So let me show you guys how this works, okay? So that's a horizon line. So actually, this blue person that I put into this space is probably a child. This is probably like a 4-year-old kid, because you guys see the eye level so low. Like if you look at the closet handles, like this is a little kid. That's why the horizon line looks like that. Okay, now there's vanishing point number 1. Vanishing point number 1 is on that side, and then what's above is eye level, okay? And actually, this is a great way to describe it. W315 says whatever lines start above eye level have to go down to meet the vanishing point. Lines from below the eye level have to go up to meet the vanishing point. Yep, exactly. Okay, so now we have below eye level. And usually in two-point perspective, I know Blue Wolf, you mentioned this earlier, most of the time they're not in the image. Okay, so if that photo of my closet in the middle, if that's a painting, it's so rare that you will have both vanishing points in the painting. They're always like way, way off. So actually for a lot of people, if they want to do measuring, sometimes you need like a big wall. So you can do the measuring going off the paper, unless you're doing like a tiny, tiny little cityscape, but that's a big pain in the butt. Okay, so this is what you do. And actually, this is Kat. This is when Kat was my teaching assistant at RISD. And so I had the student who made this pastel drawing, had like a table and a dresser in the background and stuff like this. And I said, listen, you have to measure this because it's not going to work out. And so Kat helped the student put the drawing on the wall, and we took push pins and string, and you can see the vanishing points, they were off the drawing, but because we had it on a gigantic bulletin board, Kat was able to like pull all those strings, and we just redrew all the lines. So this is what I like to call linear perspective surgery. So you guys can see where that yellow vanishing point is. That was actually where we put the push pin. and then you just tie the string around the push pin, and then you can move it around and draw the lines however you want. It's really, really nice. It's easy, it's fast, much faster and more efficient than a ruler, in my opinion. Pakolyak Chop says, the question is everything at above or below eye level in 3-point perspective? I'm not sure I totally understand your question. Hopefully I will get to that. We're not going to go over 3-point today because this lecture is going to be 80 hours if I do that, but we will get to it at some point. Okay, so in 2-point perspective, they're usually off the image, and so you end up with stuff like this, okay? When you add the vanishing lines, they're not in the painting, okay? But it's like you need to do that string technique in order to get the measuring correct. Because if you try to do this without measuring, it's not fun. So I don't recommend that, you guys. Now, another thing about 1-point and 2-point, you guys will notice that the vertical lines, so parts of the corner and the edges of the wall, those are always parallel. They're perfectly straight. They don't do wonky things the way that they do in 3-point. That's really the difference between 2-point and 3-point, is that the vertical lines change, okay? I'm not going to go over that right now, but that's what you're going to look for, okay? All right, now here's where it gets a little bit trickier, but it's actually not that difficult once you start putting it in your head, which is that 2-point perspective. You can see it in a little object. Like this is just a wastebasket that I have, okay? This object has 2-point perspective in it, okay? But you also have a building, which is huge. This can also have 2-point perspective in it, okay? It's just that the subject changes, but the structure of how things are put together does not change. It's just the scale changes and the object changes as well. Akshita says, can you still make 1 point of things above or below eye level, but for that, you will need to get to that height and look at things straight ahead and not up or down. Yeah, sorry. It's hard to ask questions about linear perspective because a lot of it depends on the situation. And usually if I don't have like a concrete diagram, it's too confusing to explain. So what I can do is maybe in the post-stream chat, if you guys have like an image, you can put in the Discord and I can answer. That's usually better because I just find it impossible to answer when I don't have a visual reference. Okay, now here's where you guys can do all kinds of things that will be sort of like a little cheat sheet for you, okay? Look for geometric patterns, okay? So anytime you have these like really ugly square ceiling lights, there's probably going to be linear perspective. So really nice to be able to see that. So there you go. There are your vanishing lines in the ceiling. Do you guys really think it's an accident that all those Renaissance paintings had checkerboard floors? It's not an accident. I mean, they were so into their checkerboard floors. And it's like people just think, oh, well, they probably just had checkerboard floors. No way. It's totally a linear perspective thing. Because if you have a floor and it's just like a linoleum floor, I don't think they had that back then. But it's like that doesn't help you with linear perspective, right? But if you have a wood floor or you have tiles or you have a checkerboard floor, it's like, oh man, that's really helpful for showing linear perspective. So anything like that that you guys can hold on to is really, really helpful. Okay, again, George Tucker, cool, creepy image. In this case, bald heads grabbing their foreheads. But if you guys look at all those spaces, you can see that that's a great way to find that linear perspective. Even this, like this is an Anselm Kiefer painting, which is like super painterly. There's like texture and stuff on top of it. And it's like a lot of people would look at this, they wouldn't even think that there's linear perspective, but there is, because you look at the tiles on the ceiling and that is a geometric pattern that you guys can look for. Same thing here. I mean, this is from The Shining, okay? You guys can use the pattern that's in the floor to help you find that linear perspective. So the thing is, you don't have to rely entirely on just like two things. A lot of people think, oh my God, if I don't have the vanishing point, I'm screwed. And I'm like, no, there are other things you can look for that might get you to find that vanishing point. Like, it doesn't have to be such a one-way street. It can be many different ways to do that. Okay, so let's break this down, okay? And you guys who are asking about eye level, this is going to make more sense, okay? So here we have the library, great place for linear perspective. That's the horizon line. And that, again, remember, is the same thing as your eye level. So does everybody see? That's about how tall I am, okay, if I'm in the library space. And think about it this way. Above your eye level, if that's me, I'm the person there, those are the books I have to stretch. Like if I want to reach one of those books that's above my eye level, I have to stretch my arm up, okay? So anything that's a book on a shelf that I have to like stretch up to reach, that's above my eye level, okay? Now, if you go below eye level, these are the books I have to bend down to actually get those books, okay? That's the difference. So I'm the person at the library, I'm standing at the corner, and I'm thinking about, okay, if I want to grab these books that are below my eye level, I'm going to have to bend down and get them. This is where seeing things in real life, it's like, oh, it actually makes sense. Like what's above eye level is something I have to reach for. It makes a lot more sense. Yeah, Soyton Lee says, around the time of the Renaissance is when they discovered perspective. So they've really liked to show it off with checkered floors. I mean, I totally would. Like, it's so smart to do it that way. All right, so now we have vanishing lines, which you can see follow the shape of that bookshelf. And they all converge to vanishing point number 2, which is way, way into the distance. Now we have the vanishing lines, and you can see these are different because they are going towards the top of those bookshelves. Okay, so if I go here, I go here. Does everybody see those like gray long posts? Those vanishing lines line up with the top of those posts. Everybody see that? Okay, so now that's vanishing point number 1. Okay, now we have our 2 vanishing points, we have our vanishing lines, and we have our parallel vertical lines. That is 2-point perspective. See? They're always parallel in 2-point perspective. If they are not, you are looking at 3-point perspective. That's the main difference between 2-point and 3-point. So remember, let's go back to my closet. Vertical lines are parallel in 2-point perspective, assuming that my closet is like a normal box. If it's a wonky box, that's not going to be the case, but that's pretty much what you guys are looking at. So this is what I'm going to tell you guys. If you guys really want to learn perspective, start by drawing from life. I know that sounds really weird because pretty much everybody else who teaches perspective is going to tell you, oh no, get the ruler, start doing measurements and create a cityscape out of imagination. That's more typically what people are going to say to you. But here's the thing. If you guys draw from direct observation, not only are you training your eye, but also you can draw people in the space. And I found this incredibly helpful because so often, haven't you guys ever seen that when people give those linear perspective projects, it's always a deserted city. And I'm like, how many circumstances are you going to have to draw a deserted city? I mean, maybe if it's a dystopian vision that you're drawing, there's not going to be anybody around. But I found that when I do linear perspective drawings and I draw people in the distance, people in the middle ground, people in the foreground, it just makes way more sense in terms of depth. So sometimes if you're at a library, that's a good place because there's always people staying around. If you're at a cafe, try to put figures into that space. It makes things a lot easier. So you can see here, we have 2 little people in the background and we have a larger person in the foreground. And remember, you guys, when you draw from life, you don't have to use a ruler, okay? You can, that's fine. I am not into rulers. I just approximate things, or sometimes if I do use a ruler, I'll approximate and then fix it with a ruler, or do the push pin and string thing where you can just like move the string around. Sometimes it's faster than a ruler, but a ruler is not necessary, okay? You can, but you don't have to. Don't feel the pressure to do that. So here's the thing. If you guys base your experience on direct observation in real life of real spaces, you're going to be in that space. You're going to understand what point of view means more. And then when you go to build a space from your imagination, you're just building diagrams, it's going to make a lot more sense. Because I think skipping over the observational part is a mistake. I think it's important to be able to see that. And yes, we are going to have a perspective draw along. It's going to be next week. So you guys are not going to want to miss that, because I'm going to show you how to really put all of these things into practice, into the context of an artwork. So again, we do have the 1-point linear perspective video. If you guys want to start here, I go way more in depth into some of the particular parts, but this video certainly does that as well. And if some of you guys want to go back and reference some of the images, this Google slideshow is available. So just go down to the YouTube video description below, and you guys can get a link to that slideshow. Art Prof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a few minutes, I will be hanging out in the Art Prof Discord. We will be in the post live streams channel. Hopefully I can get in there and answer more of your questions that I didn't have time to get to. Subscribe to our channel so you can continue to grow and develop as an artist. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters for giving us the resources we need to bring Art Prof so that it's free and available to everybody. And look at all those names. That second slide is starting to fill up. We're so excited, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.